Hey guys, it's Selwen here, today starting with the one and only Fire Mage. And as always, if you're watching this because you play Mage, do leave a comment on why you love and play Fire. So what's it all about? Well, Fire is for the most part about crits, or more so your ability to crit in order to gain your procs, hitting up or hot streak, if you happen to crit twice in a row. So using an ability like Fireball, which is your filler, and if it happens to crit, you gain hitting up. Then, if you do another and it crits as well, you gain the hot streak proc, which is what you want, allowing you to use your most powerful spell, Pyroblast. If you don't crit, you lose your hitting up buff and you will have to start all over again. Pyroblast hits much harder than Fireball, but has a pretty long cast that you want to avoid, so the proc will eliminate that. Besides that, there's also Fire Blast, an instant ability on 2 charges, does okay damage but is a guaranteed crit. Scorch, a weaker version of Fireball but casts much faster and is usable while moving. Flame Strike, your main AoE, benefiting from the hot streak as well to become instant cast. Dragon's Breath, a close range spell damaging all targets in front of you. Your artifact ability is Phoenix Flames, having 3 charges, is instant and cleaving all around the target. Like Fire Blast, is also a guaranteed crit. As for your cooldowns, there's Combustion, increasing your crit to 100% and your Mastery by 50% equal to your crit stat. So your Mastery is Ignite, a fire dot that is applied from most of your abilities, damaging for 9 seconds depending on your stat percentage. The damage stacks up on each other, but each tick is gonna drop after 9 seconds. Think of Ignite as having multiple little ignites, each coming from all of the abilities that you used in the past 9 seconds, dropping on their individual timers, but together they formulate Ignite itself. There's also some passives, Critical Mass, making you gain 10% more crit from your gear, and your spells have a flat 50% higher chance to crit. Enhanced Pyrotechnics, your Fireball non-crits will add a stacking buff, making your next Fireball do 10% increased crit chance, essentially a bad luck protection for its crits. And finally, Pyretic Incantation, making your crits increase your crit damage by 2%, stacking 5 times up to 10%, but losing the buff anytime you don't crit, so like you're hitting up. So with that then, let's talk talents. And there's quite a lot of interesting choices here on the Fire Mage. Generally, there's that single target build with a couple of choices depending on your character and whatnot, and your multi-target build, which will also have a couple of choices depending if it's sustain type of AoE or Mythic Plus or what gear you are wearing. So on the tier 1 will depend on a couple of things. Fire Starter is usually the go-to to most Fire Mages nowadays. That said, there's a couple of rules with it. Essentially, it will allow you to crit with Fireball and Pyroblast for sure for the first 10% of HP of an enemy, so until 90%. So it's great for raid bosses where you can set up some pretty juicy openers. Now, that's really only worthwhile, like I said, for raids, especially heroic and above, where that first 10% is more prominent, but you can still use it perfectly fine for normal. You might think, well, it's only useful for just a tiny part of the encounter, but if used correctly, it will outperform the other choices. The other thing with it is your leg of rests, which is a must for a Fire Mage for a variety of reasons, both DPS wise and fun in my opinion. I'll talk a lot about it in this guide, but also without it, so don't worry. But overall, this talent will also work great with it in order to once again set up a nice opener. More on that in the rotation. Now the other choices are also usable, especially if you without set rests or not raiding and you don't like how Fire Starter works, or you're not using it how it's meant to be used. So like Pyromaniac, essentially giving a chance to give you a hot streak proc right after consuming a proc, which can work great but can also proc when you don't need to, so it's more unreliable, but works. It's also nice if you're still undergeared and your crit is still not high enough, so higher than 40% at least. Conflagrate is a complete passive option, adding a dot to your Fireball and making it and Ignite Erupt. More of an AoE option, but a usable one if you cannot be parsed with the other two. Second tier is entirely optional, although Shimmer is a must, granting you 2 charges of blink and allows you to use while casting, which is great. Third tier will depend on what gear you're wearing. Rune of Power will be best if you're using the tier 21 force set and the LEGO wrists. If you only have the wrists but no tier, Rune of Power will still be great, but if you don't have either, Incanter's Flow will be best or close, providing a more stable DPS increase, while Rune of Power will allow you to choose the best moment to use that spell power increase or just power increase. Perfect to use with the wrists and combustion. Fourth tier Flame On is a must, giving you another charge of Fire Blast and reduces its cooldown by 2 seconds, so again, a must. Next tier is purely optional, so choose what you prefer. Frenetic Speed is usually the go-to though. Sixth tier for single target and stable magic is the go-to always, adding just a little more damage on your fireball, especially since the other choices are purely based for AoE. And finally, on the last tier, any can be usable, but will depend on your gear again. If you already have your tier 21 force set, Kindling will be best by banking your crits, reduce the cooldown of combustion, so you get more uses out of them. Without the tier, it's not a bad choice, but Meteor will be best by giving you a new ability on a 45-second cooldown, hitting pretty goddamn hard. Depending on your character, they might be even without the tier, so test out for yourself. As for multi-target builds, in the first tier will depend on the situation. If in the raid setting, Fire Starter can still be best, although the other choices are pretty even, so choose what you prefer. As for Mythic Plus, Conflagration will be best for that AoE damage. Fire Starter will be useless here for the most part, unless it's tyrannical, but still will be pretty useless for trash packs. And Pyromaniac can work since Hot Streak works with Flame Strike and can give you some pretty nice ones, but that conflagration dot really adds up on multiple targets, so choose what you prefer. As for Rune of Power versus Incanter's Flow, Rune of Power can work great if you can make good uses out of it, especially if you can combine it with the Living Bomb, which is a later talent. In general, in Mythic Plus, there's a lot of movement, so Incanter's Flow might be best. It really depends on you and what content you're doing and what type of player you are. If you feel that you're not able to make use out of your Rune of Power as much because you're just moving around a lot, just go for Incanter's Flow, alright? Alexstrasza's Fury can also work nicely here if you have the LEGO Helm boosting your Dragon's Breath. If not, stay with Flame On. And on the tier 6, Living Bomb will be best for content like Mythic Plus. This is great for bursty scenarios and will burst your ignites, and it's just AoE galore with it and just a lot of fun. If you in a more sustained encounter, however, say like on Tauren High Command, Flame Patch will work great for that fire dot that your Flame Strike will apply. So again, think about what content you're doing to make your decision. As for the last tier, the same reasoning from before will stand. Cinderstorm is okay if your gear isn't great for cleaving fights or AoE, so like Mythic Plus, but be careful when using it since it requires you to aim, or this will happen. Oh no. But yeah, that covers your talents. Now let's talk about your rotation. I will cover it in a couple of phases. Firstly, just gonna talk about your normal rotation, so your proc uses and all of that. Then your opener and cooldowns, followed by the same but with the LEGO rests, and if using Meteor instead of Kindling. So like I said in the beginning, fire is all about them crits and procs. So how are you gonna use them? Well, the idea here is to create a set of combos, if you will, in order to have a streak of those procs to be constantly throwing those instant pyroblasts. For the most part, that's what you're gonna do, and where most of your damage is gonna come from, plus your ignite, which is just gonna be in the background, but will greatly benefit on how you are performing your rotation, since it comes from your damage. So how do you get those procs? Well, you either gonna have to crit with a fireball, so it's random and will improve as you get more critical strike, or using abilities like Fire Blast and Phoenix Flames, which are guaranteed crit, or Pyroblast itself. Now, another basic rule with a Fire Mage is to have those abilities always ticking their cooldowns, primarily Phoenix Flames, so you can maximize their uses, especially since its cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds at random from your Ignite dot ticks. So in order to explain your rotation, let's just use a Phoenix Flames. Like I said, it will crit always, so I get hitting up and the cooldown starts to roll, which is great. Now, to get that hot streak, I need to crit again. If not, I will lose it and I'm gonna have to build it all over again, and you don't want that to happen. And remember, this is not an opener or anything, I'm just going over a normal rotation. So Fire Blast is perfect to use in these situations, and you only really want to use it to get your hot streak, never your hitting up. Now, since it's out of a global cooldown and you can even use it while casting other spells, you never want to use it solo, alright? So what you're gonna do, and what you always want to do, is cast a Fireball, and while you are casting it, you press Fire Blast. So in the middle of casting that Fireball, and you're gonna get Hot Streak in the middle of that set cast. And as a Fireball is about to finish, you do your instant Pyroblast. And basically that's the combo or chain of spells that you always want to do, because if that Fireball crits along with that Pyroblast, you're gonna get hitting up and hot streak straight from those two spells, which means you can do it all over again to keep that streak going. Now, that is if you crit with both of them. If only one of those crits, or none, you either just gonna get hitting up, so you're just gonna have to do the same as before, Fireball, Fire Blast mid-cast to get Hot Streak, and then the Pyro at the end of the Fireball cast. If you get none, you're just gonna do Fireballs until you get a hitting up. Remember that you also get that passive, Enhanced Pyrotechnics, so it shouldn't be too difficult to then do the same afterwards. Fireball, Fire Blast, Pyro. So essentially, your Fire Blast serves as a bad luck protection against you not critting to build towards a hot streak. And even though you can technically use 2 in a row if you're out of procs, you never want to do that as you are using way too much charges that you might need in the future. So you're just gonna have to do Fireballs until you get hitting up first, always. Overall, that part of the rotation will vastly smooth out as you get more crits, so it should be something you're never gonna need to do. As for Phoenix Flames, is the same. Problem with it is that it isn't out of a global cooldown and it has a travel time, so you cannot use it exactly in the same way as Fire Blast. Generally, you're rarely gonna use them outside of your combustion, that I'm gonna talk next, but you still want to use them to avoid overcapping the charges. So during those moments when you are near the 3 charges, you're gonna use them either when you need to move and you have a hitting up that then turns into a hot streak, or you have nothing and you really need to use it, so you're just gonna create a hitting up with it, or you use it with a Fireball. Problem here is with the travel time and the global cooldown, since it always travels with that Fireball. If you have a hitting up active and you send a Phoenix Flames with it, and if that Fireball crits, you get a hot streak from it and the Phoenix Flames goes to waste. If the Fireball doesn't crit, it will break the hitting up and the Phoenix Flames is just gonna generate another hitting up, which again is not optimal. So the best time to use it is with movement, so using it solo like I said before, or when you are out of procs and sending it with a Fireball. If the Fireball crits, great, you get a hot streak from both of those spells, so you can go for another Fireball and the Pyro. If it doesn't, you're just gonna get a hitting up from the Phoenix Flames, so you can go for a Fireball, Fire Blast, Pyro, just like before. Overall, it's pretty much always about Fireball, Fire Blast, Pyro, or just Fireball Pyro. Like I said, fire is very gear dependent, so your rotation will smooth out as you get more crits, and I'll talk more about that in the stats section. So if you're really undergeared, don't be disencouraged by how your Fire Mage is playing. Gear will help tremendously here. Now obviously all of this will change during your combustion and your setup for it, Rune of Power, and of course those famous like rests. So how do you open up playing with Rune of Power, Combustion, Kindling, and Firestarter. Well, first of all, what is Firestarter exactly? Well, Firestarter will work essentially as a mini and weaker combustion, making your Fireball and Pyroblasts guaranteed crits, meaning using combustion in the first 10% of HP of a boss is gonna be worthless since it's kinda gonna do the same, so you're gonna have to delay it. This also means that you will be able to easily pull that Fireball Pyro combo, and with the rests, it will allow you to also get more procs because those rests give you that powerful pyro on a chance after consuming a hot streak. So you're gonna fish away at them on that first 10% of HP to then hard cast that powerful one when going into combustion. Okay, now a lot of the previous rules are thrown out of the window going into your cooldown uses, and especially your opener. So for now, forget about the previous rules for the most part. So what you're gonna do initially is actually pre-cast a pyro. Remember that it's gonna crit for sure because of Firestarter, so you know you're gonna get a hitting up. So as a timer ticks to 0, the pull timer, you need to have that pyro ready to be sent. Then you're gonna put down your Rune of Power. It will simply increase your damage, and you want to use it to stack with your other cooldowns as much as possible. In this case is with Firestarter, but I'll talk more about it next. Now, since you have a hitting up, you can do that Fire Blast mid-cast of the Rune of Power or afterwards, to then open with an instant Pyroblast. Once again, due to Firestarter, it will crit, so you get that hitting up again. So you're just gonna use a Phoenix Flames, and in the process, you're gonna get its cooldown rolling. So with that hot streak now up, you're gonna go to your previous chain, Fireball and Pyro at the ends, and just repeat this until 90% of the HP on the boss, so until Firestarter ceases to work, so keep a track of that HP. Overall, it's pretty simple until now. As for the rest proc, you want to get one now, so hence the fishing, so you also need to keep a track for it, but don't use it just yet. Keep that rotation that I just said until 90% anyway. When there, you most likely will have a proc up and it will do 300% more damage, so it's gonna hit a truckload. But before you can do that, you also need to set up for it. So first, you want to get rid of any hot streak that you might have active, and hopefully just get a hitting up. Whatever happens though, you want that hot streak gone. Then you're gonna pop your second Rune of Power, followed by any other cooldown that you might have, like trinkets and whatnot. Then you're just gonna hard cast that pyro with set proc, and near the end of the cast, you pop Combustion to make sure that pyro is gonna crit. Combustion is also out of global cooldown, meaning you can also use it mid-cast. Plus, if you do have that hitting up, you want to use a Fire Blast mid-cast as well, so you can send 2 pyros at the end of the set cast. So basically, you're just setting up for this huge pyro buffed by Combustion, Rune of Power, and any other buff that you might have, and even the things like Pyretic Incantation from your artifact traits that stacks up every time you crit. Now, after that, you're gonna enter your Combustion rotation. Now, Combustion, like previously said, increases your crit to 100%, but also your mastery according to your crit stat, meaning your Ignite is gonna tick pretty hard. That's why you also want to set up that hard cast pyro as well with it, so you get a big fat Ignite on there. Also meaning you want to fit as many pyros as you possibly can. To do that, you want to use your instant abilities along with your Pyroblasts, like Fire Blast and Phoenix Flames. That's why you were saving them. Okay, so if you send a pyro with that hardcast pyro just before, you will have a hot streak right away, so you just use it. And if you didn't and you just have hitting up, you're just gonna go for Fire Blast, then Pyro. Fire Blast, Pyro, just using all those charges to get hot streaks for those pyro crits, stacking up that Ignite. Once out of Fire Blast charges, you move on to Phoenix Flames and do the same. Phoenix Flames, Pyro, until out of them. When you are out of both of them, you're just gonna then switch to Fireball instead, but should be right at the end of Combustion, so it should be fine. But if you do have a wrist proc and there's still enough time in your Combustion to fit it, use it instead. So basically, that's how your Combustion rotation is gonna play out. Just Pyro, Pyro, and more Pyros and big pyros here or there. Now, after that's done, you're gonna go back to your normal rotation as before of fireballs, fire blast, pyro, fireball, pyro, etc. and etc. Now, what about using those cooldowns and rests procs mid-fight? Well, Rune of Power you want to stack up with your combustion always, so save up one charge for it. Remember, with kindling, the cooldown of combustion is going to be reduced to 1 minute or so keep track of that. But if you do get an extra Rune of Power to use, since it has 2 charges, combo it with a hard cast pyro and make the most out of it as you can. So those hard cast pyros, you just want to use them as much as you can throughout, simply putting. So you get them, use them as fast as possible so you don't overwrite that proc with another hot streak. You only want to delay them if you're going to be able to get the Rune of Power in there and still have it ready for combustion, or if combustion is about to be ready to use and you want to use it with it. Also remember that the hard cast pyro is going to function like a fireball in a way, so if you have heating up while you are casting it, you can use a fire blast mid-cast to then send 2 pyros. As for combustion mid-fight, well, it's the same as in your opener. Have a Rune of Power ready to go with it and wrist pyro proc. So cast Rune of Power first, hard cast a pyro, combustion at the end to then enter those instant casts rotation. So before it comes ready, you want to have those Phoenix Flames and Fire Blasts charges to go with it, so save them. Basically how I explained in previously on your rotation. So when it gets near the cooldown to be ready, 10, 15, 20 seconds, you want to stack up those charges and basically just keep it up until stuff dies, and that covers it. Now, if you're not using Firestarter, Rune of Power, nor the Lego Rests, and with Meteor, it will change a bit. Well, your rotation, your normal rotation, all will stay the same, okay? It's just your opener that changes. So all of that Firestarter setup is gone, and it will be easier since you can still precast a pyro. There's no harm in that, or a fireball if you're using conflagration for that fire dot that applies. And then you pop your meteor. It takes quite a while to drop, 1 to 2 seconds, so you can safely use it now to then pop your combustion, making sure when it drops, it still benefits from it. But you also don't want to pop combustion and then use a meteor, because then you're losing a global cooldown of combustion where you could be using a pyro. Okay, then you're just gonna go to that instant cast rotation as before to get as many pyros as you can. So Phoenix Flames first to get the cooldown rolling, and if that pre-cast spell critted, you just go straight for a hot streak pyro or follow with a fire blast to then pyro, fire blast pyro, Phoenix Flames pyro, and etc. Once it ends, you just go back to that normal rotation. You should be able to use one meteor outside of combustion to then save the next one to combo with it, so delay it a little bit. As for combustion mid-fight, it kind of stays the same. You want to save as many fire blasts and Phoenix Flames with it and try to enter it with a hot streak already active, so you can go straight to those instant casts. Besides that, in terms of movement for both builds, remember that every hot streak pyro, there's a little opening in your global cooldowns to move, so make the most out of it as you can, and you won't lose out DPS in order to gain some ground or reposition. If it's in an emergency, you of course use your shimmer, and remember that is usable while casting. Never separate your fireballs from pyros when moving. Keep with your rotation rules. If that's the case, you have Scorch to use, which works the same as a weaker fireball, but is usable while moving, alright? So you're just gonna switch that for Scorch Fire Blast since it works in the same way, alright? Don't sacrifice your rotation because of movement, since you have so many ways to overcome that. And that covers it all. Essentially, you're just gonna be constantly thinking about your next move on how to reach that hot streak without screwing anything up. As for your multi-target rotation, it's quite simple. For the most part, all will stay. You're just gonna prioritize Phoenix Flames a bit more since it cleaves and it will spread your ignite. But the idea here is to simply do the same as before, and everything will kind of happen naturally, but replace Spyros with Flame Strikes on about 3 targets or more. With 2, you keep a normal rotation. If with Living Bomb, that will take priority above all, so you would want to cast that first, then Rune of Power if using it, then Combustion if you're going all out, then just Phoenix Flames and a Fire Blast for a hot streak, for a flame strike. Remember that flame strike does not proc your hitting ups, so you're gonna have to always do Phoenix Flames with a Fire Blast to get those flame strikes quick. Outside of the cooldowns, you just keep using Living Bomb and putting out as much flame strikes as you can, and your ignite should do its thing to give you pretty good damage. Obviously, you can get close into your Dragon's Breath as well, especially if you spec into Alexstrasza's Fury and if you have the Helm, although with the Helm you don't really need to get close to it, and it will also do some pretty good damage. And that covers it all. Now to talk about stats and then to wrap up. So stats will come down to a couple of things. Crit will remain a priority to you until you reach around 40% at least. You kind of want more than that, but 40% is where things, 40-45% is where things start to smooth out. Before that, the spec won't play as good as it should. After that, you can start focusing a little on mastery to increase that ignite damage. As for haste, it's good as it will reduce cast times and decrease Fire Blast CD. Overall, it's never a priority, but you do want some of it. As for versatility, it might become valuable once you have your other stats at a decent level. As always with things like this, will change constantly from character to character, so remember to do them sims. As for legendaries, as you probably guessed, the wrists are a must for a single target, improving gameplay and DPS greatly. After that, either the Bloodlust Ring or the Waste that enables you to enter a sort of execute phase with your Scourge at 35% HP if I'm not wrong, so you're gonna replace fireballs for that, making it a great addition as well, and they are pretty even between the Ring and the Waste. With that time warp, you always want to try and make it active during your combustions whenever possible, by the way, so you can more easily fit in those pyros, since haste reduces your global cooldowns. Overall, I think Fire is the most fun mage specs. I do love Frost, but I could never play it as a main with all the RNG shitshow that it has. Fire does have some RNG, but it comes down to your crits, meaning your gear makes wonders, plus the way the spec works is never really an issue. The RNG here is actually making it fun, especially with the rests added on top and then all the setting up that you want to do with it. I honestly wouldn't recommend anyone to play Fire Mage without the rests and without proper crit, as it will just play kinda dreadfully. But with that, it's really quite amazing. And as always, guys, thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos like this. I hope it helps. Remember to comment on why you love Fire. Have a fantastic day, everyone, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.